Well, thank you, everybody. We are resuming our Thursday, January 26th Board of Regents meeting. To my fellow regents, it's a little quiet here without everybody, but Des and Elizabeth and I just tried to hold up the fort here. So hope that y'all had a good break. We are going to dive right back into our agenda, and what we have up next is our Academic and Student Affairs Committee, and I would like to introduce Regent Cerna to kick that off and walk us through the agenda items.
Thank you, Chair Dickinson, and welcome everybody back from lunch. And I'd like to welcome everyone to the Board of Regents Academic and Student Affairs Committee meeting. We're live over YouTube. A link to the YouTube can be found on the Board of Regents website. We have a couple of future action items to take up. The first is a proposed redesignation of the Doctor of Nursing Practice degree from a graduate to a professional degree. And I'm going to turn it over to Chancellor Elizabeth Chilton to discuss.
Well, thank you for that, Regent Cerna. And I'm going to take off my chancellor hat for a minute and put on my provost hat, which is how I appear before you today for this proposal. And, hopefully you've had a chance to take a look. But this is just to give you a slightly broader context. You may all know that recently I appointed Tammy Barry as Vice Provost for Graduate and Professional Education, formerly as the Dean of the Graduate School. That position was formerly known as Dean of the Graduate School. And essentially for research-related degrees, an MA, a PhD, we have traditionally had the graduate school oversee those. Professional degrees are often overseen by the individual colleges where they're housed. And so my goal in creating this new position of Vice Provost Graduate and Professional Education was to have a more seamless approach to providing support for when should a degree be considered a professional degree versus a research degree. And the U.S. Department of Education has a complex rubric by which they evaluate what is most appropriate. So in this case, the difference is really trying to make it be more in alignment with peers, but also in alignment with the kind of degree coming out the other side for our students, to make sure our students have a more experience between their undergraduate, master's, and doctorate degree in nursing practice. So you have the background there. We do have executive president in case there are specific from the Spokane campus perspective. But this is year in the making. I've been working with Mary Coythan, Dean of Nursing. We've been working with our accreditation overview. Craig Parks has been helping greatly. This has been approved by the Faculty Senate. And really all parties are very enthusiastic about moving forward with this. It's really in many ways a housekeeping item to make sure we're in alignment with general practices, best practices. So I will leave it at that and see if there are any questions that I can answer, if there are any questions, or if I cannot, I'm hoping Daryl will be able to provide some more detail as well.
Daryl, is there anything you want to say about this?
No, I'm very pleased that the team has brought this forward and Elizabeth is leading this. This is a clinical practitioner role that these folks take when they step into their professional roles. These are not researchers, generally speaking. So this is very much in fitting with their education, their preparation, than what they do in their professional careers. So thanks for asking, but I'm very pleased that this is moving forward.
Are there any questions? Go ahead.
Enrique or Regent Cerna, I was just going to ask, and I think Chancellor DeWalt spoke to this, but just for the benefit of folks of understanding the designation and the differentiation between a graduate degree to a professional degree, like what are those differentiators that, move the needle here on this particular thing, and why is that so important?
Elizabeth or Daryl, who wants to pick that up?
I'll start in and then let as Daryl said, this is very much a practitioner type of degree. Typically, our degrees that go through the graduate school are PhDs, our masters. Those are research related degrees. We do have some professional masters. And again, those are distinct from the research masters, which is often a step on the way to a PhD. So for people who are going to go on in the academy and academia to be faculty, professors, or to work in research settings and laboratories. This is very much a practitioner related degree. And we have a number of these, mostly in the health sciences, but not exclusively. And that's really why I really wanted to have this new role of Vice Provost for Graduate and Professional, to make sure we're not just creating degrees because that's the way we've always done them, but to go through and make sure that they're actually serving the purpose that they need to. Some of the things that you can do with a professional degree is you can charge differential tuition. You cannot do that with an MA or a PhD. We have to have all of those charge the same tuition. That doesn't mean we will do that, and that would have to be a separate approval process. But it does allow us to think about, for a particular program, are there special academic costs related to teaching those students where we might want to charge a differential tuition, but you can't do that with graduate degrees.
And I think that's a good input for sure. In addition, with this program, folks, most of the people who are in our DNP program are already practicing. So they have to be board certified as well. So these are professional degrees. They have a role in primary care. Many of them, as you know, we refer to these individuals in our system as mid-levels. They don't like that designation, and I get it. But these are primary care clinical practitioners that work across the system, and most of them already have a nursing credential, and they are taking this degree on top of their practice. So it's a really valuable degree, and it is a professional degree for sure.
Are there any other questions from the Regents? Just pipe up. I don't know if I could see your hand or not. So
I would just comment, Enrique, I fully support the designation. And as an example, the two people most responsible for keeping me alive with DNP credentials.
good thing. And you're over the rainbow, or maybe you're.
Are they responsible for making you so ornery as well, or?
That's medication.
Yeah. I thought it was supposed to be less than that stuff, wasn't it? All right. Are there any other questions?
We're glad Regent Blankenship is healthy. Thank you for the explanation and background. I just have a quick question. Just to clarify again, the people who may be in the program or coming into the program, they won't have any change perception of value like the actual students or the the people going through the program. I just I'm not sure about perceptions,
It'll go up.
Okay, thank you.
Exactly. And the degree, the title of the degree will stay the same. It's still a DNP. And so the credential will be recognized. As you saw in the background, about 60% of our peers have this as a professional degree, and the other 40% as a graduate degree. So it's a little bit across the map, but this is most consistent with our immediate peers, in particular UW, and statewide recognition of this degree. And it also fits better with the master's programs in the School of Nursing now, so that we're being consistent within our college as well.
So it's a good thing. All right. Any other questions? All right. Thank you very much. Let's move on to our next item, and that is a proposed amendment to WAC 504-24 policies and regulations for student living groups. Again, Provost and Pullman Chancellor Elizabeth Chilton and Vice Chancellor for Student Affairs Ellen Taylor are going to tell us about this.
I am going to turn this one over to Ellen.
Great. Thank you so much, Chancellor Chilton, and thank you, Regent Cerna and committee board members. And I'm going to ask to go right into the next slide. So what we will be bringing to you as an action item at our next meeting, future action at present, is, as Regent Cerna said, a revision to WAC 504-24030. And this is really an update and clarification of the rules around our first year living requirement, also known as FLIR. There are a couple of goals embedded in this. One, we want to improve the university's ability to respond to emergent student needs and individual circumstances, but also be a little bit responsive to what we're seeing as trends in today's first year students. The essence of this is removing the option for first year students to live in off-campus university approved housing. And if we can go to the next slide, I'll give a little background and more detail about what that means. So the UAH program, as it has been known, has been in place for a number of years, and it allows a limited number of first-year students who are otherwise required to live in our on-campus residence halls to live with an approved fraternity or sorority organization in their privately owned off-campus chapter house after the fall recruitment period. During the pandemic, UAH was suspended as part of our COVID-19 mitigation measures. And as we were returning to in-person in 2021, we charged a work group of WSU students, staff, and alumni who are affiliated with the Greek community to do an evaluation of the UAH program. They did that work. They did an excellent job, and they came back with recommendations and a variety of sort of possibilities. And based in part on their recommendations, although not entirely, but also based on our review of the literature and our peers and legal advice and various other things, we decided to recommend permanently discontinuing the UAH program beginning fall of 2023. So this coming fall. And the goal of this really is about enabling all of our first year students to benefit from the programs and services that are provided by our residence life staff and other on-campus units, and to ensure a successful transition from high school to college. Next slide, please. This will have some impact on some of our fraternities and sororities. There's a couple of errors here. It's actually about 6 fraternities and 14 sororities that have participated in the UAH process each year. It varies a little bit from year to year. And a total of approximately 260 students have each year been essentially exempted from that first year live-in requirement to move into the off-campus housing. And now they would continue living with us in our residence halls. There is a financial impact for those fraternities and sororities. We alerted them to this anticipated change in February of 2022 to give them a full year and a half to start to plan for that impact and to really start to brainstorm and consider alternative models, especially for addressing their desired occupancy level in their off-campus houses. And we've been meeting regularly with current student leaders and alums and advisors for the various fraternity and sorority houses over the last several months, and really not just discussing UAH, but also other matters of concern, most particularly recruitment challenges more broadly and really not having to do with UAH. And that's not just unique to WSU. That's something, those are trends we're seeing nationally. There is a public hearing scheduled for this WAC change on February 8th. And when we come to you at the next meeting, we will, of course, have updates about any of the public hearing or public commentary that we get on that date. And now I think I'm done with the slides, and I'll turn it over to questions. So maybe we can stop the slideshow.
I have a question, and that is, well, tell us a little bit more about some of the feedback you've gotten, I suppose, from alumni that might be related to the fraternities and sororities in this.
You know, the majority of feedback we've gotten has been that they are in favor of this change. That they actually do believe this is in the best interest of the student members of their fraternity or sorority that they are affiliated with as an alumnus or alumna. And that said, there are 2 or 3 that are pretty concerned about the financial impact. So I've met individually with a couple of alums who have talked about, you know, sort of the challenges of that this presents for their organization. One of the things that they've shared with me is that often by the time our students are juniors or seniors, they don't want to live in the fraternity or sorority house any longer. And so they have really relied on freshmen to meet their occupancy needs in order to sort of meet their financial obligations for those houses in terms of rent and other financial obligations associated with owning and operating a communal living house. So I've had frank conversations with them about that, and we've talked about our commitment to continuing to support recruitment, our commitment to working with them around shifting it so that they're focusing more on sophomores and juniors living in those houses instead of freshmen and sophomores living in them, and enabling that transition to college life to occur with the sort of support that we can provide through the residential life programs that we have in our residence halls.
Are there any other questions or comments?
Ellen, it would seem like, says Regent Dickinson, it would seem like with those fraternities and sororities, you know, they do have some levers they can pull around how they manage their membership. And just from a continuity perspective, it seems like it would be more beneficial to them to have perhaps juniors and sophomores living in their house, just from continuity and leadership versus the younger versions, like, you know, a freshman and sophomore needing some oversight perhaps and needing some guidance. And so I can you explain, or is there certainly where I have experienced college and student living through my own children, it is a requirement in each of these locations that you do live in campus housing, or you live in a dorm your freshman year. Is that tending to be more of the trend across the country? Because it seems like everywhere I kind of looking to, that is a requirement.
I do think that it is trending in that direction right now nationally. Not every institution has the capacity to house their entire first year class on campus. And we do, in fact, have the capacity to do that. We are one of about half of the Pac-12 institutions have the capacity in their on-campus residence halls to be able to house their first year student. And those that have that capacity tend to have this kind of requirement in place. And it really does fit with what you were saying, Regent Dickinson, around the developmental trajectory. You know, spending that first year out of high school, living in the residence hall, getting oriented to campus life, having us be a little more ability to engage with them more intensively, if you will, as they're making that transition, and then moving into the house if they choose to in their sophomore, junior year, and so on, and then stepping into those leadership roles in those houses when they are a little bit more developmentally, a little further along the college student developmental trajectory.
Thank you.
Any other questions? All right. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate these presentations from Chancellor Chilton and also from Ellen Taylor. Thank you. And this is the conclusion of our agenda items. The Academic and Student Affairs Committee is concluded, and we turn the meeting back over to Chair Dickinson.
Thank you, Regent Cerna. I would like to just ask Regent Cerna if we could go ahead with our future action item, the proposed redesignation of the Doctor of Nursing practice degree from graduate to professional degree. Would like to move that to tomorrow's consent agenda, just so we have that going forward. Is that Any
All right.
opposition? Is there any opposition to doing that from the other Board of Regents, is to move it forward to the consent agenda? Okay, then we'll make that happen. So thank you.
All right. Thank you.
All right, excellent. Great committee report there. Thank you, Regent Cerna, for your work on the committee and for leading it. And appreciate Chancellor Chilton and as well as Ellen. Good to see you, Ellen. And thanks for all the work you do on behalf of our students. You do an amazing job. So, okay, we are moving in to our Finance Administration Committee report, and we will have our wonderful Regent Shower take the helm now, and she will lead us through a fairly meaty agenda. But when is the Finance and Administration Committee not meaty, right? So Regent Shower, I'll give it to you.
Thank you. Actually, this is relatively short agenda for this particular committee. And I really want to welcome everyone to the Finance and Administration Committee. We do have a few items, and we also have some action items for tomorrow. So with that, I'd like to start with our athletic budget update. We have with us today our Senior Associate Athletic Director and CFO, Brent Meyer, and Deputy Director of Athletics, Ann McCoy, who will be first up to give us an athletic budget update.
Well, thank you, Regent. I appreciate it, and good afternoon to everyone. As Regent Shower said, my name is Brent, and I started my role here as CFO for athletics back in September. So this is my first time officially presenting to you all, so I appreciate you having me. Long story short, I think this is an exciting time for Cougar athletics. And I'm excited to just on a high level basis, at least give you a quick rundown of our fiscal 22 results, and then give you an update where we're looking to land for fiscal 23. Starting with 22, long story short, like I said, we ended the year on a high note, finishing ahead of budget, landing at about a $1.3 million surplus. And that does include the $10 million of reinvested savings from the debt refinancing. So, that certainly helped. No question. But if you'll recall, if we think back to the spring of 21, when we were creating the budgets for fiscal 22, there were still a lot of uncertainties that remained with regards to COVID and how those would impact our business. Going into that year, they took an optimistic yet conservative approach, not knowing what sort of capacity limits there may be on events or restrictions that would impact ticket revenues or donations. On the expense side, we also didn't know to what extent we would still incur some pandemic-related expenses, such as testing of our student athletes and staff. Fortunately, at least from a budget perspective, we were able to operate in I think what we could consider a best-case scenario for fiscal 22 and then deliver the positive results. Moving into 23, maybe taking a little bit of a turn, currently projecting a small operating deficit. And with that, I wasn't yet comfortable identifying specific revenue enhancements that we might be able to find for the last half of the year or expense savings. But with that said, I am optimistic there could be good news in the future. The current projected deficit is certainly not insurmountable. It's about $400,000. But we'll continue to monitor our financial position and work towards balancing these numbers. Certainly understand the importance of doing that. If I could boil it down to probably one component, it's our distribution from the Pac-12 is looking to come in a little bit less than what we budgeted. And I just want to reiterate, it's a budget deficit relative to the distribution. It is not an indication of the Pac-12 coming in short on the revenue side from what they projected. It's just the timing of when we create the budgets and when we get the final numbers from the Pac-12 result in a little bit of a shift there. But because of the success of the league in football this year, we got 2 teams into the CFP. I do think there's some upside there. So hopefully when we come to the March meeting, we'll be able to give you some good news there. On the expense side, I am taking a conservative approach. That is my nature in general, that you'll probably see moving forward. But we know inflation is real. It's having an impact on our sport programs as they travel, with meals, with lodging, those sorts of things. I do expect these headwinds to continue throughout the fiscal year. It's not much different than probably what we all see on a personal level as we have, you know, our own expenses in our own households and the inflationary impacts there. With that, I'll open it up. If anybody has any questions or comments, would be happy to do my best to try to answer those.
Thank you, and welcome to welcome to the Board of Regents. I think it's important that we certainly note the celebratory nature of the ability for us to achieve a surplus. And while $400,000 in terms of a deficit is still $400,000, it's certainly different than where we've been in the past. So I appreciate the attention to ensuring that we find a solution there. I want to say, just before I open this up to questions, that I continue to be so impressed with and appreciative of the tremendous collaboration and partnership between our athletics business office and our university Department of Finance and admin team. And so, you know, I really want to give a bit of a shout out here to our Associate Vice President for Finance, Matt Skinner. I think you've done a great job of, in particular, helping me to make sure that I know all the folks that are involved here and keeping folks really kind of helping me as a regent in a space that is not what I do on a day-to-day basis, understand you know, the significance of what we're doing and how we are on a path to really ensure that fiscal stability, which is such a big part of our president's leadership and vision. And so as we look at that overall kind of multi-year chart that is in our packet that describes kind of where we've been and where we're headed, it's just really, again, another moment of celebration to think about how our teams are working together to be able to achieve this level of recovery. So with that, I do want to open it up to see if other regents have specific questions relative to the athletic budget update.
Regent Shower, I have a couple of questions that, you know, indirectly, I guess, I don't know if you can answer this, Brent, or if Anne is able to do this at this time, but I do think it would be prudent for the Board of Regents to continue to understand and learn more about NIL and the portal and the impacts that could have to budget, because, you know, people come watch players play because there's loyalty to perhaps a player, and we are seeing a lot of movement in that. When we go to a bowl game, it's expensive to go to a bowl game, and when you have a lot of players that don't end up playing, there's a budget impact to that. So I know it's difficult to project, but are we starting to really think and try to build in within this recovery how these two factors are going to impact athletics at Washington State University across the board for women's sports and men's sports and all of the things that we do within the Pac-10, 12, sorry. Whatever it is these days. So, and not to mention that component, which I know is a whole nother animal, but I think that that's not a topic, and maybe that's something Kurt can think about too with Pat, of really educating us more now that we're learning more about NIL and the portal, but everything, you know, we're just kind of getting bombarded by a lot of that at the moment. So Brent, Ann, do you have any additional insight on that or comments?
From my standpoint, you know, it's a good question, good comments, and I think, you know, there's probably not a school in the country that doesn't have the same question or comments, and there's still a lot to learn. You know, it's still a relatively new topic. I think it would be short-sighted to think there's not going to be some impact, but that impact could be positive too. So in terms of from a budget impact, but as of right now, I think it's just too early to predict exactly what the long-term impact will be. You know, now my personal opinion, this is just me speaking, not me on behalf of WSU athletics, whatever. I think at some point the market's going to stabilize. I think right now it's the new shiny object out there. You're seeing a lot of movement, but there's a lot of players getting left behind in that transfer portal. And I think as things stabilize, it'll be less of a distraction. But again, that's my opinion. By no means, don't paint me as an expert on NIL or the transfer portal, but just for whatever it's worth. I don't know, Ann, if you have any additional thoughts.
No, Brent, I would agree with that very much. And this is a space that Pat has been very involved with, not only nationally, but within the Pac-12. And I know has had a lot of conversations with President Schultz, Chancellor Chilton, and everyone. This is a topic generally, whether it be the portal, NIL, and just kind of the where college athletics is going that Pat's extremely passionate and involved with, I would say. And so I think we're assessing the portal, like you said, Brent. I think some student athletes are having buyer's remorse a little bit and realizing, the portal may be not all that it's cracked up to be. So we're hoping there's kind of a natural, check and balance there that will evolve over time. And then as far as NIL, I think we're really exploring, what are the federal options, what are the state options, and just what does that mean for Washington State University and what makes the most sense for us. So I think it will be definitely a topics of much conversation, and really will be fascinated and interested for advice and leadership, not only from the campus and the conference, but certainly the board as to what makes sense for Washington State's involvement in any of that space.
Well, Regent Shower, I would just like to be on record and perhaps have Kirk there. I mean, the topic of what is occurring in the Pac-12, the NIL and the portal, and how it is changing the landscape of college athletics, and knowing that one of our single biggest budget deficits is athletics, we should probably dedicate some time to a future Regent meeting to understanding what we do know about that, and the role, to Ann's point, that we are being good influencers around that, and then how our state fits into things, because there's just a lot of noise, and I recognize that, and it's very new, but they're three pretty meaty topics that could have ramifications, or just so that the regions understand and can speak appropriately to those things when we're out and about.
Absolutely. I took some notes, and I think President Schultz has some comments too.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Dickinson. I appreciate the thought. I just spent Saturday with 9 other university presidents from around the country talking about this. We had a whole day strategizing around NIL, the transfer portal, things like that. And I was in the room with several presidents that, let's just say, are in the top 5 athletic budgets in the country. And they said the same exact thing you did, and the same question. So it's not WSU is somehow in a different place than Ohio State. All of us are trying to deal with the same thing. Interestingly, Brent's comment was shared by the majority of individuals in the room when we were meeting, that if you let market forces dictate this, within a year or so, people felt that what's out there now is unsustainable, because it's one-time money that people are putting in to try and, provide these assets to players. And that the transfer portal, one person, and we have not seen this data, a huge percentage of the people going to the transfer portal dropped down in terms of prestige and opportunity from school to school, so that all of a sudden that wasn't looking maybe quite as attractive as it would seem to once do. What I would suggest to the board is have Pat, myself, Ann, and others, maybe at a future Thursday session, go through where we are with NIL, where we are with the transfer portal. We're starting to get some national statistics now about, what is the impact on student athletes for entering the transfer portal? Are we seeing students complete degrees that are transferring 2, 3, and 4 times through all this to optimize playing opportunities? And then I think the final thing I would just sort of say in all this is that we're in a unique position at WSU and with our colleagues at the University of Washington, and that the 2 federal committees that are going to deal with this one is chaired by Maria Cantwell, and the other is chaired on the House side by Kathy McMorris Rogers. So Washington as a state and WSU as an institution is going to need to be in a leadership position at really dealing with this on a federal level. And we've got a 2-year window where we've got people in really powerful seats that want to see us be successful. And I think it's a real opportunity for us. So anyway, happy to talk a lot more about this, but do know presidents, ADs, this is on all of our conversations about the impacts it's going to have on student athletes, on competitiveness, on budget, and just making sure that we're I think it's going to get worse before it gets better. I'll be frank. I just think it's kind of the Wild West right now. And I think there'll be some stabilization next year or so.
Thank you.
This is Regents Cerna, and I'd like to ask a question just about where are we with the television contracts with the Pac-12, and how does affect our budgeting with the athletic department?
So we are currently in negotiating with several media partners. I really think we felt we needed to let UCLA and where they were going to land play out officially with the UC Board of Regents, and that obviously all of you know has been done. And so now what we're doing is we're in earnest conversation with multiple media partners. I know people are reading online about lots of different names tossed out there. I'll just say I've got a board meeting in Phoenix on Monday, and this is going to be a big topic of the conversations with the board. I'll know more in a week or two about where we are. And Ann or Brent, I don't know if you have anything further you care to share about this.
I don't have any further information on that. So thanks for that summary.
Enrique, obviously this is really important to us. I think when we look at our long-term budget, I know our faculty senate colleagues had a very robust discussion about repayment of that internal debt, and having a really solid media contract signed with some enhanced revenues coming in. Add on to that an expanded college football playoff, which is going to happen with also enhanced revenues coming into WSU, and everybody else is going to give us an opportunity, I think, to address some of the longstanding challenges and opportunities we've had at WSU. And so I think we're well poised. And look, you want to be in a position with new revenue coming in to be at a balanced budget and not having to fill in well, we got an operating deficit. So I think our team has done a really nice job of getting us to that balanced operating budget, and new revenues coming in then can really help enhance where we need to go. So happy to provide more details at the March meeting as we move forward with our media negotiations.
Regent Cerna, are you?
I'm sorry. I was just going to say, I think that would be really good because it's also part of, I think, other things that we've been talking about that Chair Dickinson has brought up. I think that should be part of that conversation as well, since it's kind of a national conversation as well as something that affects, obviously WSU and its involvement in the Pac-12 or whatever it's going to be.
Happy to do it.
I'm really glad.
I can say so. Yeah. Anyway, good.
I'm really glad that you asked this question, Chair Dickinson, because it does have multiple different dimensions. And I remember at one of the student and academic, whatever committee, official committee name, Regent Cerna chairs, that there was a presentation, and I was thinking, gosh, that presentation seems like it really has impacts on all these other areas. And so when we look at it from a budget perspective, there's an impact there, but there really is, feels very strategic and one that affects so many different areas of the university. So I'm hearing March meeting, and I'm also hearing there's probably several different groups that may need to be part of kind of looking at this and being ready to kind of speak to the impact. But there is a finance and budget piece of that as well. So other questions relative to the athletic budget update from the other board members? Okay, not seeing any other questions. So I'm going to go ahead and say thank you to Brent and Ann, and I appreciate the work that you've put into this. And we'll see you at the next meeting. And I'm going to move us on to the academic year 2023-2024 tuition rates. I just want to say that I really appreciate being able to see this agenda topic in January. So we have an opportunity to look at this again over a 3-meeting cycle. We take action on any tuition rate Increases in March. Someone's
May.
going to need to correct. May.
May.
That's what I thought. So it's 3 meetings, right? I was like, oh, maybe I have my math wrong. It is 3 meetings. And so I think it is helpful, I know, for us to be able to really understand what we're being asked to say yes to, and the implications, particularly as it relates to all of the different stakeholders. So with that, I am going to turn this over to Associate Vice President for Finance, Matt Skinner, and our Executive Director, Kelly Westhoff.
Well, thank you, Regent Schauer. Nice to see you, Board of Regents. Thanks for the chance to be here this afternoon. As we get started, I just echo what Regent Schauer said. It's great to have the first of 3 discussions around rate setting for the coming academic year. And we will just try to provide some background. The presentation that was in your packet hopefully provides information and background that will be useful for future discussions and considerations by the board as we look at tuition rates. So I'll screen share here. Okay, I'm just going to double check if people are seeing the PowerPoint there. Awesome. Also, as we get started, just want to recognize and thank Kelly Westhoff and her team, who do such a great job of facilitating this rate setting process across many groups across the system. Appreciate her and her team. So in the time we have today, we'll do a brief overview of some of the information that was included in your packet. I'll start off talking a little bit about the enrollment and tuition outlook. Turn it over to Kelly. She'll talk a bit about the tuition rate setting authority of the board and some background on resident undergraduate tuition rates and some of the affordability efforts that are underway across the state and at Washington State University. Then I'll wrap things up with some history on other tuition categories, including non-resident undergraduate tuition and graduate tuition rates. Then we'll talk a little bit about the current thinking and proposal for tuition rates for next academic year. So these first 3 slides is actually information we had the pleasure of reviewing with the board last meeting in the November meeting in Vancouver. A reminder of we're in our 3rd consecutive year of declining enrollment. We're down about 4,000 students, or just over 13% enrollment since fall 2019, which was fiscal year 2020. As we look at that, looking forward on a projection, we, for financial planning purposes, we're taking hopefully a moderate view to our enrollment. We're assuming incoming class size for those first-year students and new transfer students at the same level for fall 2023 as they were in fall 2022. If that is how that plays out, we'll be looking at about a 4 to 6% drop in enrollment for next fall. At the same time, I want to recognize the great discussion we had at the last board meeting in November, that there are a lot of actions underway at Washington State University to try to impact and move that enrollment trend in a positive direction. And so in no way I'm discounting that effort. This is the planning scenario we're using for finance purposes right now. We take those 2 slides of enrollment, we can see how those translate to tuition revenue at the university over time. And again, embedded in these projections for fiscal year 24, shown in the yellow column here, are those 2 underlying assumptions of the same number of first-year students and transfer students next year as we had in fall 2022, and a 2.5% tuition increase. And with that change, then that's how tuition will play out there for us. The tuition revenue will drop by about $3 to $4 million next fiscal year with the current projected enrollment. So again, just a recap of some of the information we looked at last November. Kelly, I'll turn it over to you to get started on some of the rate setting authority.
Matt, I'm sorry.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Just before we move on from this slide, we saw unexpectedly better numbers for spring new first year students and transfer students across, I think, all of our campuses than we expected. And projections for the fall would have our enrollment maybe up substantially. So I just want to the Regents that Matt and his team have done exactly what they should, is budgeted along the most conservative kind of thing so that we don't have this artificially high number. It doesn't come to pass and we put ourselves in a self-induced crisis. So I just want the Regents to, I want to reinforce that is we think this is the worst case scenario. And if we have enhanced enrollments, like I think we will have, that's good news for everybody. But I think there's a lot of indications that right now would suggest that certainly in Pullman and a couple other places, we could be up a really nice amount. So I just want to make sure I put a little sense of optimism moving ahead around this, and happy to provide in March and so on. You know, we'll provide the Regents with a little bit more sense of where we think maybe enrollment would be on each of our campuses for fall, that I think could build a little bit upon this. So Matt, I just wanted to add that in there. I'm a glass half full guy, and I just want us to make sure that our expectation is we're going to be up. We're not just sitting around. The final thing I'll say on that is Stacy, Elizabeth, myself, and others have invested probably another $500,000 or more with Saichi's team now to make sure that we're laying the groundwork in place to have a really great fall enrollment across all of our campuses. So a lot of behind the scenes work going to make sure that we're putting money where we need to really optimize housing and enrollment information.
And I think also, and Matt, you can correct me if I'm wrong about this, but some of your projections there include the fact that fall of 2019 was our largest incoming class ever, and they're graduating in the spring of 23. And so it is true that our enrollments look like they'll be up, and that's a lead indicator. So hopefully that will bring us back from the dip. But is that correct? That's partly what you're projecting here, is the graduation of that large class.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really valid point.
Keep rolling. Sorry to interrupt.
No interruption. Thanks, Kirk and Elizabeth, for providing that context. That's really helpful to the discussion. Kelly, I think you're up.
Yes, thank you, Matt. So again, this is reminder information, but just to remind the Regents of the tuition setting authority and how that works. So the legislature does set a limit for the increase in resident undergraduate tuition. That's based on the average annual percentage growth rate in median hourly wage for Washington for 14 years. So it's a very longitudinal index. So the Regents are authorized to increase resident undergraduate tuition up to that cap, which is announced currently every spring. For all other categories of tuition within the system, so non-resident and graduate rates, the Regents have the ability to increase those rates or set those rates however they desire without limit. And the next set of slides are, as Matt mentioned, this is a deep dive into our resident undergraduate tuition and just what's happened over time with that rate. So just to orient you to the chart and for context, about 2/3 of our total tuition comes from resident undergraduates. So this is by far the largest pool of tuition when we think of our total tuition. In the chart, the bars represent the actual dollar cost of tuition on an annual basis. The line on the chart represents the rate increases that have occurred in each of those years. So a couple of takeaways from this chart. It's obvious the volatility on the left side of the chart when you look at the line and what had happened with tuition rates. I've got some information a little bit later when I talk about affordability about why that was. And then you'll notice that flattening out of the rate setting since 2018. And also when you look at the bar on the far left of the chart compared to the bar on the far right of the chart representing the cost of tuition, you'll note that the tuition rate for the current year is actually less than it was in 2012-13. So we're just now kind of getting back to that level, and those are not inflation adjusted dollars. So just a takeaway there. So representing the right side of that chart where we saw the line flattening, this is a comparison of that maximum rate that is allowed for a resident undergraduate tuition increase versus the rates that WSU increased in each of these years. So the highlighted rows, you'll see a couple of years where WSU actually increased our rates less than the amount that was authorized by the state. And then to talk a bit about legislative and WSU efforts toward affordability and to speak to some of the volatility on that graph as far as the tuition rate setting after the Great Recession. So again, longitudinally over about 10 years since the Great Recession, where resident undergraduate rates jumped almost 75%, the legislature took action to freeze rates for two consecutive two biennia to reduce, they either reduced them or flattened them at zero. And then we came into the period with our current law, which is the modest tuition rate rate increases indexed to median wage growth. So kind of that flattening 2 to 2.5% a year. Another big benefit driven by the legislature was the Washington College Grant Program, which is an entitlement program that guarantees funding to our neediest students for the full cost of tuition. That program replaced the previously underfunded state need grant program and is really a benefit to our students. And then something we're looking forward to this year, there is legislation being proposed that would result in an earlier notification for us as to the tuition rate that we can propose for the ensuing fiscal year. So currently we get that notification late in the spring, sometime late April, early May. This legislation would move that date up to October 1st, which would be a really helpful thing for our planning efforts, not only for the institution, but also for our students and families as they're trying to plan for costs. And we could determine those rate increases much earlier in the cycle. And then finally, an internal effort that's been made to increase affordability is that WSU adopted a tuition payment plan. So this is now allowing our students and their families to pay their tuition and fees in installments over the course of the semester. And this is the really good news slide, and I'm the fortunate one to get to share it, but some of the outcomes of these affordability efforts you can see listed here. But over the period of time represented in that chart that showed our tuition rates and the rate increases, we have seen significant increases in important metrics. So our resident undergrads who pay no tuition has increased from 31% to 37%. The percent of resident undergrads who pay full tuition has fallen from 42% to 33%. The percent of resident undergrads who graduate with no loan debt has increased just over 10%. And for resident undergrads who do graduate with debt, that is actually down as well, and both not inflation adjusted dollars again. And those average debt amounts are both less than a national average. So some good news there too.
Yeah, thanks, Kelly. And as we were looking at this slide, I was thinking about Regent Cerna, actually, and he always does such a wonderful job of reminding us to ask what is the positive story we should be sharing. And this is certainly some really great news of efforts that are making WSU more affordable and accessible to individuals across the state that would like to achieve their educational goals. So this is pretty good. Thanks for sharing that, Kelly. Kelly got the fun slides. I get more of the historical, boring stuff today. So we'll look a little bit at the non-resident undergraduate tuition rates again over time. We're going to see a kind of routine trend across the next three slides. For many years, the institution held undergraduate non-resident tuition at a 0% increase. Over the last few years, that increase has been matched directly to the percent increase for resident undergrads, and that has been the same. Currently, undergraduate non-resident tuition contributes about 20% to the overall tuition funding of the university. We look at resident graduate rates, similar story, held flat for many years and now has been generally tied to the percent increase for resident undergraduates applies to graduate students. And as we look at a similar trend for the non-resident graduate rates as well. Just a point there for graduate tuition, combining both our resident and non-resident tuition there, about 6% of the university's total tuition revenue comes from graduate students. That's due in large part that as we are able to have many graduate students choose to pursue their educational goals here at Washington State University, they often receive some sort of assistantship as part of their education experience, and we usually waive tuition associated with that assistantship. So with a little bit of that history, hopefully that's helpful for the board as we go through the next couple of meetings, just to have that history and background on where we've been. This is what's currently being discussed or proposed for tuition rates for the next academic year. Again, looking at 2.5% is what we believe will be that inflation adjustment allowed by the state law and by the Office of Financial Management of the state. This shows how that 2.5% would translate in annual dollar amounts to each tuition rate group. About $268 per year increase for undergraduate resident students. Then we can see on some different groups, in particular non-residents, the amount is slightly higher at about $660 or $679 per year for non-resident undergraduate and graduate students. On this chart, you'll notice a few things are missing here. As we talked about in our session earlier, we do have professional programs. Some of those professional programs have their own unique tuition category, and each dean is in the process right now of assessing their program and if any adjustment to those tuition rates would be requested. We'll have all that information for the board at the March meeting. So you'll see this chart expand to include some of those professional program rates as well. So this last slide, maybe to be honest, in retrospect, looks a little more bold than we expected, than we anticipated it to be. Why a tuition increase? Maybe if I could retitle that, I'd just say, what are some perspectives that we're thinking about as the university as we think about tuition rate increases? It's always something that's very thoughtful and difficult discussions internally as we think about these. Some things that come to mind. Certainly, tuition rate is one means to lessen the need for budget reductions, and we are anticipating some budget reductions again next year. That will be the 5th consecutive year of budget reductions at the university. We're very fortunate to have the Washington College Grant Program in place in the state of Washington that by design allows for these inflationary increases in tuition, and for those students with the most need, the grant program will pick up that full cost of the tuition increase. So there should be no impact on affordability for our students and families with most need. And then the other thing we think about is from a university budgeting perspective, we of course have state appropriations and tuitions as primary funding mechanisms within our operating budget. The state doesn't typically provide new appropriations for inflationary activity. So we're often left using our tuition funds to help deal with a wider range of inflationary costs, be that minimum wage to maintenance to utility costs. I just heard last week that utility costs are trending at about $4 million high this year compared to the last year. So boy, they can really move up quickly. And so those could certainly drive the need for a tuition increase. At the same time, I might offer that as we move through a budget reduction planning cycle, we'll be very thoughtful for how we take those to make sure that we maximize the services that we have available to our students, that they have a wonderful experience here still, even as we move through some budget reductions as we move forward. So I'm going to pause there and open it up for the discussion. Kirk, Elizabeth, you might have some context, or Regent Shower, then we're ready to open it up for questions after Kirk and Elizabeth.
Matt, on the 4th bullet I would add in your last slide is that the legislature generally assumes the maximum tuition increase, and when they consider salaries and compensation, they just put that in as part of what's going to be available. That's not our choice. That's just simply the way it's done. But I think as we consider compensation, that just is another factor that should be considered. So.
Yeah, that's a great point. In some ways, it's not elective anymore when they bake that into the state budget. That's a really valid point. One thing I should mention, Regent Shower, as we wrap up, is what to expect for next steps from a board perspective. In March, we'll be back with a future action item regarding tuition rates. That will include the rates we've discussed today, plus proposals for professional programs, if any. Then during that same spring timeline, we'll be out meeting with student leadership from all the different campuses. It's very important that we include students in this process, collecting feedback and thoughts about the rate proposal. We anticipate providing that feedback right back to the board. So you have that as part of your deliberation that comes from our student leadership. Then finally, at the May meeting, you'll see the rates as an action item where we'd be asking the board to take action on any rate adjustments. So.
Regent Shower.
Sorry, just
Go ahead.
Provost Chilton, do you have additional comments you want to make? And then I can open it up for questions and comments.
Just one comment, as we have been discussing this over the past few years, and comparing how we address issues of tuition compared to our peers. Obviously, that dip that you saw where suddenly there was a large increase and then there was nothing and then there was a little bit more, like that makes it really difficult for families to plan. So I know among our leadership in finance and administration, the desire is to, try to track inflation, but try to keep that as even keeled as possible for family planning purposes. Some universities, in fact, the one where my son is, they actually tell you up front, like we expect to raise it by 2% or 3% every year, just so you can plan. So that's partly what we're thinking of in our planning going forward.
I have long been an advocate for that transparent communication, just because it seems like as a parent, it's important to have the opportunity to plan as a family member that might be supporting a grandkid who's going through school, and as someone who's supporting themselves going through school, being able to plan ahead is so critical. So I think that communications piece is really important. I think Chair Dickinson, did you have a question or comment? And we can go to you first.
So on bullet number 2 of the Washington College Grant Program. So as much as I love that, we are still because I'm knee deep in FAFSA completion for the Eastern Washington kids and North Idaho kids, but we're still 48th in the United States for completing FAFSA. So we are dreadfully, and Idaho, I believe, is 47th. So as we look at increasing tuition and we look at declining enrollment or potential, flat enrollment, it would be really great to see how we could couple together a campaign or a story or encouragement of FAFSA completion that can help get these students access to some funds, because you're not getting access to this stuff if you can't complete FAFSA, right? So the door opens so much more for our potential students here at WSU if we can complete that. And we have we have run 5 FAFSA completion nights in our branches, in the STCU branches over the last 3 months. We've had 32 families complete FAFSA, and we have 52 waiting in the wings because they're trying to get their paperwork together. But we've turned so many away because they haven't filed their taxes for a consistent period of time. I mean, there's a massive education that should be starting in the 9th grade, really, for kids that are looking to go to college and try to manage these, just tuition in general, because it's tuition, right? That we're only talking about tuition. We're not even talking about the really expensive stuff, which is room and board and what you pay to have your kid live on campus as well. So.
Yeah, thank you for that. That's a great point. And I might just add on to that there's lots of opportunity in the state of Washington to educate about the Washington College Grant Program, in my opinion, as well. And as you mentioned, those go together, the FAFSA and that. But I think there's many residents in the state of Washington that aren't aware of how combined with federal aid and the Washington Grant Program, that they can accomplish their goals. They can do that here at WSU without the financial barriers that they might perceive. So what a great opportunity for us.
I believe the statistic right now is in 2021, we left as a state close to $50 million in federal grant funding on the table for our kids. So I think WSU has an opportunity to go be a champion for how we get kids access through FAFSA. So, and it could couple with disdain of a increase, a tuition increase. So
Really good comments, and it should be a huge sense of urgency to help reduce this as a barrier. Regent Chilton, you have your hand up.
Hi. Yes, thank you, Regent Shower. I had a question about sort of the timeline between now that we're hearing this information and when it becomes an action item in May. Is there anything that potentially would change this recommendation? I'm thinking about, for example, President Schultz's comment about the possibility that enrollment will not look, as dreadful as we might be concerned. So what would potentially change this recommendation, if anything?
Yeah, thank you, Regent Chilton. That's a great question, and I'll recruit some help on that with Kirk and Elizabeth. I think we'll want to continue to model things really closely, looking at both enrollment, get a sense for what that budget looks like, as well as Kirk mentioned, how much of the increase is kind of pre-baked into the legislative budget. That's a really important aspect of this as well. We'll get that information start rolling in by March, and that will give us much better perspective for the board's consideration in March meeting for sure.
I think unless the legislature did something extraordinary, I don't see that changing dramatically over the next several months, only because I don't know what data would come in that would cause us to really change that. We can have all kinds of wonderful, optimistic, projections on enrollment at any campus, but as I've learned through my career and my colleagues have, man, you don't count that until the 10th day of class when you know how many people are actually there and things like that. So even if we came back with really rosy projections, we've really got to sort of see what it looks like. So I don't think that would affect it. But, the legislature, there's always lots of ideas floating around, some good and some bad. And that would be the only thing I can think of that would dramatically change that. I think if the economy of the U.S. had some sort of, catastrophic type of thing occur in the next several months, we certainly have to be aware of that. But I think one of the reasons we wanted to be very careful about putting it out now was not to kind of put it out and give some range, but say, this is what we believe our proposal will be. And then that way we have plenty of time to solicit feedback. So Regent Chilton, did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Provost Chilton, did you have another comment that you wanted to add?
Really just adding to what Kirk said, which is also,
Okay.
We have had enrollment reductions or reduced enrollment over the last few years. And if we did have an increase in students coming in, we still are graduating those other students. And I think it's going to take a year or two for us to, even in an improved situation, start to actually see that turn into long-term financial improvement, if you see what I'm saying. So it's not something like, oh, we have 400 new students, so everything's okay now. We have to actually have that work through and make sure we're retaining students. And also there's added costs when you add students, right? You might need to hire more instructors or more staff. So I think, really just what Kirk was saying, we need to see how this stabilizes once we actually get to September.
Okay, really good conversation. The good news here is this will be on our agenda 2 more times. So March and May.
I have a question as well.
Oh, okay. Sorry, go ahead. Yes.
My question is, how are we figuring in any sort of price elasticity into this model? So does an increase in tuition perhaps decrease our enrollment and leave us with less revenue in the end? So do we have some sense of how this tuition increase might affect enrollment or does affect enrollment? And in particular, how does our tuition plus fees compare to some of the nearby universities, and in particular, the universities within the state?
Yeah, thank you. That's a wonderful question. To be honest, I was thinking about that over the weekend about the elasticity question. I think it's been a little while since we've tried to do some internal studies on that. I think that's a valuable question. We have lots of econometric experts here at the university that might be able to help with some of that analysis there and that modeling, which is great. If we'd like to take that on, I would add because of the way that the state statute is designed there, we do tend to see that most of the institutions in the state avail themselves of that same increase. So they tend to kind of move together across the state. That certainly wouldn't, though, explain the elasticity between other choices of out-of-state options that individuals and families might be looking at. So I think that's a really valid question.
One of the other challenges around that, and I think at our next meeting, Matt, and I know that our team have got where we are compared to national peers, regional peers, state of Washington. So we can show the board all of those numbers so people know exactly what that looks like. One of the challenges compared to other states too is with that cap each year, let's just say we decided to be 0 1 year. You can't wait until the economy gets better or enrollment gets better and then say, okay, now we can up at 5%. That's not allowed. So if you don't do an increase, it's not like you can wait a couple of years and go back and correct for that. And other states, sometimes you have more variability in what you can do each year. So that also affects our elasticity in my mind, because it doesn't mean that as things change that you can actually bump it more. It's tied to such a strict formula. Matt, you may have a better sense of this. I mean, the chance of it changing dramatically in the next 5 years beyond, mid twos are almost 0. So we can do some modeling. I think that's a good thing. And if you know anybody, with a background in mathematics that might be able to help us out, appreciate any recommendation.
Now leave it to the math person to ask the elasticity question. I'm sure it was on the top of Regent Shower's tongue to ask the question though, right?
Yeah, I'm writing it down and I'm like, how do I spell? Just kidding. Anyway,
Yeah,
so Judy, maybe a little help
Not
there.
just in my pants.
Thanks, Marty. Okay, 2 hands up.
I would say,
Sorry.
Lisa, I'll give up the floor after this, but as other regions have things they would like to see, that's what we need to hear. Is that way we can present data that people go, this is valid, or this is what I really wanted to see. So as much as I'm laughing about it, I think it's a good, serious question around elasticity, and we'll put some thought and analysis into it.
I see Regent, actually, Provost Chilton and Regent Ramos hand up. But I also wanted to follow up on, because I'm keeping my to-dos here from all of these questions. There was another question around peer, how our tuition setting, and I know that is generally part of the presentation in March, and so I suspect it is also planned for March as well, but I will put it on the list. Okay, Provost Chilton.
Which Chilton are you talking to? Yeah, I just wanted to say that Saichi Oba and Stacy Pearson have a group together that they chair. We call it the Net Tuition Group, unless they've come up with a more exciting name than that. But it really looks at the question that Regent McDonald is asking, and really trying to be more strategic, if you will, about making sure that any aid dollars that we have to give out are going where they are needed most. And this is really both an art and a science, because for some students, 2.5% will make a difference between whether they can afford to come here or not. And for other students, it will not make a difference. And so the question is, how do we make sure we're getting aid where it needs to go and getting financial assistance in whatever form where it needs to go? So Saichi has been doing a lot of work with this. I know he'll be part of the presentations in May. And when we talk more about enrollment, he's not here today and not prepared to present on that. But I did want to just make sure everyone knew that this was something that has been worked on at WSU for the past several years.
Regent Ramos.
Thank you, Regent Shower. And I really do appreciate the elasticity question. But along with that as well, kind of back to our goal of student experience, there seems to be a story here that also needs to be accessible in terms of context and all the work that's being done by all the various groups to try to maintain cost control and be cognizant of impact to students, and all the opportunities to help with aid, whether at a federal or state level. And I'm wondering if, if there's any demand for that, or if students are just, feeling like helpless in the situation. So I guess I'm just encouraging somehow, maybe in a contextual way, that the government relations team shows the story, that there is an effort to try to maintain costs and to try not to impact students, and that we're here to help with aid. So it's just another plug for storytelling and communication. Thank you.
Really good point. Are there any other questions or comments before I move us to our next agenda topic?
Lisa, one to respond to Regent Ramos' observation. In our meetings with state legislators, for example, we share what the average debt load of a Washington State graduate today has versus 10 years ago, and it's gone down. So we have several statistics like that we actually use frequently when we're talking not about tuition, just about what the university is doing and operationally how we're supporting our students. And so we do pay attention to a lot of these things, and it's something that we talk about on a frequent basis with elected officials, parents, and others to let them know that this is something that we work on. So I don't want your comment to go like, oh, well, yeah, sure. But I think we can also share some of that data with the board. I mean, we also want to make sure we don't inundate you, because the March meeting tends to be extremely data heavy. But on the other hand, these are the types of things I think we can share. And that outcome is almost more important than what the box looks like, to show and demonstrate that it's costing our families less and that more of our students are graduating with a smaller debt load than they were a decade ago. I think that's really good progress.
Okay, great. Thank you.
I see Phil's hands up.
Hi, thank you. I just wanted to share with the Regents, we did actually just this month launch a campaign, a paid advertising campaign to prospective students that talks about the affordability and accessibility of an education at WSU. It includes a lot of the data that are included in the slides that Kelly and Matt shared. And I'll go ahead maybe at the end of the meeting today via email and share a link to this website that we created, because I think you'll see that it does a really nice job of helping parents and students look at the total cost of education, not just tuition, but also room and board and books, and kind of walks them through the process to say, how much is it really going to cost me as a family to send a student here to WSU. Also includes a really nice video that was produced in-house that talks about 3 ways that you can make your education more affordable, and completing the FAFSA is number 1. That's certainly the first thing and the most important thing students can do. So I would say just keep an eye out for that. I'll send the information to Des and have her share it with you all this afternoon.
Thank you. Oh, Regent Serna. Yeah.
Yeah. What do we do to help people fill out the FAFSA, the families and others? I mean, do we offer that service or help or whatever? What does the university do there?
Yes, we do. President Schultz.
Well, I think we do some, and I'm the wrong person to do that. We need our financial aid people here to talk directly about that. And I think Regent Serna, we will make sure that we have that information available. This is as Regent Dickinson pointed out, this is a major issue. Pre-pandemic, a lot of high school counselors would do this role and help their students. And then, during the pandemic, some of those counselors are more involved now in mental health and other types of things. And so we really lost some of the people that really assisted with that. I know Regent Dickinson and the organization she works with is taking a really progressive view on trying to help families fill this out. That's through private practice, but we are, hell, we're right rock bottom in the United States as a state. And given all our technological focus with, all these companies here, you would think that this would not be the major thing. We left state dollars, not we, but state dollars were left on, in the budget because not enough students applied for them. So this is, the kind of thing that FAFSA is going to require some additional investment. To be honest, folks, though, we can invest in people doing FAFSA, and we can invest in more financial aid officers and more admissions officers. We're making the best decisions we can about where to put our resources. And if we had 3 times as much, we could invest in other types of areas that I think would help the whole system. I think I'm going to meet with some folks in Seattle and this next, I think a week or so from now. And this is going to be something that we're going to, with the business community, it's going to be something we're going to talk about because there's a lot of interest in building this up. Marty, Regent Dickinson, you've spent a lot of time looking at this, and you may have a better sense of some of what's going on outside of what WSU is doing, which is a question Regent Cerna asked. You want to give any more details about what STCU is doing? Because I think the board may be interested.
Yeah, thanks, Kirk. What we are finding is people are less comfortable, Regent Cerna, in doing the traditional thing of showing up at the high school orientation and working and sitting with the counselor with all their financial information right there and trying to share that with somebody. There's a barrier there around sharing some of that information. There's a barrier that we have found because we've spending some time in right now beta testing FAFSA completion in Othello and using our branch there, which we have several families coming in, but we have bilingual bankers that are helping them do that. So there's a trust issue that we are hoping to try to navigate through. But for Eastern Washington and North Idaho, an entity by the name of Launch Northwest has been founded, and there's a couple of us raising several $100 million for a scholarship that if you complete FAFSA as a senior in Eastern Washington or North Idaho, you are guaranteed to have your last mile, the gap closed through this endowment that we've raised the money for. And you can go to a 4-year institution, but it needs to be in Eastern Washington. So it needs to be Central, Eastern Washington University or Washington State. You can go to a 2-year community colleges within our Eastern footprint, and you can get a certificate or a trade. Any of those things, you will qualify, and we will guarantee every senior that graduates from any of our high schools in Eastern Washington and North Idaho to close that final mile for them. So it's pretty significant, but we've raised $70 million to date, and we still have a long ways to go. Our goal is 150 million, but it's taken a massive community effort to figure out how Eastern Washington is going to change the trajectory of FAFSA completion and the trajectory of getting kids to post-secondary opportunity. Not necessarily, it's not 4 years isn't for everybody, right? So what is that post-secondary opportunity? So it is staggering to kind of see these families struggling to complete it. And I think we have a real opportunity in our state to lift up and change a lot of future lives if we could figure this out and crack the nut.
It's daunting because I know people that are college educated that their kids are going to, I've had them say, what is this thing? And how do you do it? And then I think of people that are, from underserved communities and, they're just trying to get by, but then how do you help your child do this? So it's just in this, where I'm at here in Seattle, I just think that there are folks that we should be part of this discussion to see how it could help. And there's people in the business community, Kirk, that I'd like to share some names with you that might be able to be a part of that as well. So they're bankers and credit union people and things like that. So, yeah. Okay.
I responded with yes, we help, mostly because early when I started my role as a region, this was such a big issue from my perspective. And I think it isn't an issue that is just simply limited within this finance committee. I think it's student affairs. I think it's enrollment. Like there are so many hands involved with trying to reduce the barriers and bring students to Washington State. So I responded quickly just because I think there is work to be done at WSU, but broadly, and I'm so glad that you shared, Marty, what you're doing outside of your service to WSU, because I think it takes all of us to be actively engaged with how we can bring folks to the table to make this a conversation that doesn't exist with one university, but that we're all looking at as a state, how we get folks to utilize the money that's out there to be able to access higher ed. So I am going to go ahead and move us along and try to get us back a little bit on schedule. But the point of us talking about tuition for 3 meetings is so we engage in this kind of a conversation so that you don't feel like by the time we get to May, there wasn't enough time to ask questions and be prepared in each of these follow-on sessions. So I really do encourage you to follow up. I have several different notes and action items from the questions that were asked here today that I think can certainly be integrated into the presentation in March, some of which is just standard for that March presentation. So with that, I want to go ahead and move us over to the next agenda item, which is WSU Pullman, and it's a revision of the housing and pricing structure. We have Vice Chancellor for Student Affairs, Ellen Taylor, Assistant Vice Chancellor for Student Affairs, Linda McDermott, and Resident Life and Housing Director, Meg Autry, who are all here to talk with us about this, this change. So with that, Ellen.
Thank you so much, Regent Schauer. I appreciate that. And as you said, I've got my colleagues Linda and Meg here with me. I'm going to do a little bit of introduction and context setting and then hand the proverbial mic over to Linda, who will walk through most of the slides. Meg is here largely to answer questions that Linda and I may have no idea about. And so that is kind of where we are at. So we can go ahead to the first content slide, if you will. For a little bit of context and background, all of you know this, but just as a reminder, our WSU Pullman housing and dining system is entirely a self-sustaining auxiliary. So we get no state dollars or other dollars. We really do have to set rates and generate revenue through the various activities that the system engages in to cover all operational costs, bond covenants, and so on. Historically, our rates have been the rates have been set many years ago. I don't know, 15, 20 years ago. And each year there's been an evaluation. And when rate increases have occurred, they've generally been just sort of across the board, not using any kind of strategic or deeper analysis of that. You all will probably remember that we contracted with Reith Jones in 2022 to do an overview to review our housing and dining operations with us. And one of the things that came out of that consultation was that they recommended that we review our housing pricing structure. And we have engaged in that. So Linda and her team and Meg and her team have spent a lot of time doing the analysis, testing out different models of pricing structures and seeing where they would land us. Reith Jones really helped us understand that we were either over or under pricing our inventory, depending on the particular housing option that we were looking at. And so we've done this work, and so what this is really just an informational item for you all to know that when we come to you in March with a future action item and May with an action item, not only will we be looking at the pricing module or the pricing matrix that we will be presenting to you, but it will look different and it will be taking into account this new pricing model structure. So with all of that, I'm going to hand the mic to Linda and let her walk you through it.
All right, thank you, Alan, and thank you for letting us present this to you. As similar to the tuition conversation, we also think it's good to get these changes out to you early so you can think about it and develop those questions. So as Ellen said, before we move to the next slide, our historical practice was really a facility would come online and we'd set a price, and from there on out, we would do rate adjustments, again, similar to tuition increases to cover our increasing costs of operations, but we didn't really take a deep dive into why we were making these adjustments. It was truly an example of budget-driven decision-making, and our pricing strategy or strategies really didn't focus on what we were offering. So the consultants' work really led us to examine our historical practice, as Ellen said, with the goal of paying a close attention to our inventory as well as our peer benchmarks. What are other institutions that students attend? What are they charging for similar amenities and services? And it was really important for us to spend a fair amount of time to figure out why in certain areas we were above the market, or how did we get so far below the benchmark. So with this review, I think we've found that we're committed to a regular review of how we price our housing and our residence halls and apartments, and then refine and update them as we go along. So if you go ahead to slide 2, the next slide, what this background really led to was a design and looking at some of the implications for a new model. And as Ellen also mentioned, we started with a small group of us on the team, and we really started by asking ourselves the questions, like 3 simple questions. What, why, and how? Like, what are we charging for? How are we setting the prices? And then why do we charge? Why do we need to charge these rates? And so those questions, we ended up coming up with this proposed new construct. And basically what it looks like is that every residence hall, as well as individual rooms within a residence hall, will be assigned to a pricing tier. And we came up with 4 pricing tiers based on our current inventory. And tier 1, if you think about tier 1, that will be the top cost. And we've identified the base cost being a double room with a community bathroom, and that the tiers below, the additional tiers, will be discounted off that base. And then from that, we will adjust our prices based on the nature of the room. For example, is it a single room? Is it a double room, a suite, as well as what other amenities do they have? A private bath? Do they have a shared bathroom, or are they in a facility and is their room attached to a community bath? The lower tiers, the lower tiers where we've been looking at this is most of our inventory reside in the lower tiers, and that's just tiers 2 through 4. And that is literally just a reflection of the age of our residence halls on the WSU Pullman campus. The other, when you look in the write-up that was provided, the characteristics by which we use to determine the assignment of tiers that detail is provided, and then also the actual halls that are established within the tier pricing model. We also, by doing this, we're able to construct a model that results in no across-the-board rate increase for the 2023-24 year, 2023-24 fiscal year. However, what that does, because we were able to move around what we charge for individual halls and rooms, it actually will generate the revenue that we need to sustain our operations for next year based on our assumption of occupancy and our assumption of cost increases. So once we did residence halls, we also did we took a similar approach with our university campus owned apartments. And so we have two major categories of apartments. We have single student apartments where students share rooms and we rent an apartment unit by the individual room. And then we also have graduate and family apartments where those units are rented by the actual apartment unit. So we ended up with 3 pricing tiers in our single student apartments, and then 4 pricing tiers in our graduate and family apartments. And similar to our residence hall approach, we are starting with the tier 1 as a base cost, and then any amenities are adjusted or the condition of the facilities, the demand for the facilities, or otherwise referred to as characteristics. We're adjusting the prices based off of that base. And then on the apartment, the additional amenities look a little different than residence hall because it's really based on, am I purchasing a furnished or an unfurnished apartment? How large is the unit? The number of rooms within a unit, and then also the comparable off-campus benchmarks are used in the Pullman community to really test our apartment prices. So that's kind of the structure of it. And, you know, when like I said, we identified our questions, and the what and the why became the facility, the room type, and what would cause a room or a price to result in a different price. And then the how was the construct of the tier evaluation plus the amenities available. So you can go ahead and move on to the next slide. And so when we got there, when we came up with this construct and we tested a little bit, we really were able to take a step back and ask ourselves, you know, how did it meet our institutional goals? And the things you see on these slides are really what we're able to communicate and articulate and be committed to, that the framework is much simpler to understand. Students or families will be able to see a pricing matrix based on their tier, the type of room they're requesting, and they'll know exactly what the annual cost of that room will be. And like I said earlier, the prices are truly based on our inventory realities of the older units. We did pay a lot of attention trying to get ourselves rebalanced to our peer benchmarks, and that with the commitment of reviewing those on a regular basis. And then, yes, most all of our things do ultimately come back to a budget decision. And once we tested these models, based on our occupancy assumptions, do we think this model will generate the revenue that we need to generate to meet our operating and our longer term obligations for the housing and dining system on the Pullman campus. So those were our goals. And then from the student perspective or impacts on the students, we think this model provides the greatest number of rooms in the lowest lowest pricing tiers. Nearly 80% of our rooms are priced in tiers 2 through 4. So that tier 1, and if you look at the write-up, most of our tier 1 halls are on the north side of campus, and our tiers 2 through 4 are on the other side of campus. It does, as I mentioned, it allows students and families to make informed housing decisions based on the tier pricing and available room options that we have and amenities. And then I think most importantly, as part of this process, we have been engaging with our housing and dining student advisory board, and they are both very supportive of this approach and express that they see value in the transparency, but just the logic around how we are pricing and how this construct and model works. So with that, I will turn it over to questions. Our intent would be, again, to bring a future action on the rate setting in March with approval in May as well. And these rates and this new model would take effect for next academic year. So I will turn it back to Ellen and any questions for the Regents.
Any questions? I'll add one, go ahead.
You mentioned that Meg mentioned, Ellen, that to do these revisions with the housing, it allows you to sustain for next year's budget. I'm assuming there's nothing here that helps move the majority of our housing into a more updated, newer. I mean, I think that is a conversation probably for another day, I recognize, but understanding that if you read the study pretty carefully, we have a lot of maintenance and some updates that we really need to do to our for the experience, to Jeanette's point, right, to the student experience. Housing's a big deal, so is dining.
Yeah, what this does is it is built around our inventory as it currently exists, and in the condition it exists with the amenities that are in place in the various halls and apartment complexes. Some, and at least some, and I think actually many of the lower price point options will actually be going down a bit in price for next year, and some of the higher price point options will be going up. So we have to see changes because we're changing the pricing structure. So there'll be sort of changes up and down across the inventory. But the good news is the lower price points will go down and the higher price points will go up. So you'll see a greater gap between that, instead of that being mushed together and students paying more like the same price for amenities and facilities that are not very comparable. Did that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think the
Regent
point though
Serna?
is that, the amount of inventory we have on that higher price point, if people want to pay for it, is incredibly limited. And that's where we're going to run into student experience issues.
Absolutely.
I might have missed this, Ellen, but do we know what students think of this yet?
We are, as Linda said, we have a student advisory board. Housing and Dining has actually, they have had one of the most robust and well-functioning student advisory boards for, I don't know, a couple of decades. And they have been very involved in this conversation. And the feedback that what we've gotten so far is, this is rational, it's logical, it makes sense, I can understand it, and it's more predictable. It's what students would expect. It's like, if I'm going to buy, I'll use an analogy, if I'm going to buy this iPhone, I'm going to get these features. And if I pay more, I'm paying more for additional features that I want. And this really reflects what you would see in a marketplace like that. So they actually like it. I think it's more transparent. I feel like they know what they're paying for. If you're paying for a private bathroom, this is what that adds to the cost of the room. If you are in a building that has air conditioning, this is what that adds to the cost of the room. And actually, we're doing it in the opposite direction of discounting for amenities that are not available, but it adds up to the same thing from the student ability to process what and do planning.
Regent Ramos.
Thank you.
Thank you. Just a couple questions. Are the UAH numbers already contemplated in the new model calculation that we discussed earlier? And then the second question is there something about the culture of the site where the newer things are only on the north side, and I forget, a little geographically challenged here, but where I used to live 35 years ago is still the same. So what's happening with the cultural impact of that?
Yeah, I'll start with your first question, which is, yes, as we anticipated, occupancy for fall of 23, we took into account the elimination of the UAH. So knowing that those two on average, 260 students would not be moving out after the first couple of weeks of fall semester. And in terms of the other, I think that really is what you're tapping into is the whole conversation we've been having about the South Side rejuvenation initiative. I can't speak to the history. I've been here 4.5 years, so I can't really speak to the history of how decisions have been made prior to my being here about which halls might be, where new halls would be built or which halls would be renovated or so on. But you're absolutely right, Regent Ramos, that there's a sort of divide between the north side of campus and the south side of campus. It's not. There are some lower price points options on the north side of campus as well. But there are no high price point options on the south side of campus. I think I said that right. There's one higher price point option on the south side of campus. So, but there is a sort of disparity on the campus environment. It's one of the reasons we've focused on the south side with the other project that we've been engaging with you all about. And it's why we have proposed to start with a dining facility, because it will impact the largest number of students who live on that south side.
Thank you.
You bet.
I think as we have this conversation, it's hard not to imagine how it also certainly relates to keeping student experience and recruiting new students when we think about the housing that we have and the dining facilities that we have. So hopefully as we transition into, more of an emphasis in being able to revitalize areas, that will help us attract and keep students feeling like they're in housing that reflects the experience that they want. So
yeah, and I know
Judy, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Well, I'm trying to watch the screen. I can watch the screen, but it's in the room. And sometimes I'm not sure if Regent McDonald is leaning in with a question. And so, okay. All right. I'll hear Regent Dickinson.
I'll emphasize one last point.
If I want something.
Thank you. Okay, Ellen. Yes.
Linda mentioned this, but if we are able to do some of the projects that we've envisioned around, either remodeling or building new, whatever that ends up looking like, going back to Linda's point about that, we will periodically each year review the model and say, okay, are the tiers, do they still work? Do they still make sense? Do they still reflect the inventory that we have, and make adjustments as that inventory changes and evolves over time?
Okay. So this is, as has already been shared, this is going to come back in front of the board for action and for a future action item. So I'm going to go ahead and move us to the next two items that will be action items. And so first up is WSU Pullman Champion Center Design Phase Approval. We have Matt, who's back up, and Associate Vice President for Facilities, Olivia Yang, and Deputy Director of Athletics, Dan, back again. Okay.
Great. Thanks, Regent Schauer. So this is an action item. We saw this as a future action item back in November. This will be an action item to seek authorization by the board and a delegation to the president or his designee to proceed with the design phase for the Champions Athletics Complex. This design amount is to not exceed $2 million. From a budget perspective, we do have those funds in place, donated funds, cash in hand to pay for that design. I would just highlight in the write-up, no changes to that write-up that are material from the last time the board met. We did, in collaborative with athletics, add what we call a kind of a best practice checkpoint that we're going to continue to work collaboratively with the athletics department just to track that we're on pace financially, that the funds are coming in as projected. We found that to be really useful, and we look forward to working with athletics on that. So when we get around to December of next year, when we're ready to come back to the board with approval to proceed with construction, there's no surprises about any of the finances. So really appreciate working with Pat and his team on that effort. So let me pause, see if Anne has anything from a programmatic perspective, Regent Shower, that she'd like to add, and then also pause for Olivia if she has anything from a kind of a design timeline or perspective.
Yeah, thank you, Matt and Regent Shower. Brent Meyer hung in there too. So if there's any financial specific questions that anyone might have, he's on there to assist. But I would just say I'm excited that Pat was traveling today to give me a chance to talk about this project, to be honest, because it's something I'm so excited about. It's just a tremendous opportunity, I think, for Washington State to take that next forward in what we really have always tried to prioritize, which is both the human and student part of our student athlete population. We always say that we can't control, even with the best facilities, the best coaches, the best university, and all of the support, we can't always control the outcome of all of the various contests or athletic endeavors of our student athletes. But what we can try to control is giving them the best possible chance and all the tools to be successful and happy and healthy as students while they're here, but then also to take that next step once they leave with a degree from Washington State University into that next step of their lives. And I think this Champion Center is a huge part of that. We have so many great services right now with academics, mental health support, nutrition, student athlete development. Certainly, as we talked about earlier, all of the new exciting things coming on board, whether it be name, image, likeness, or other things that the NCAA is starting to deregulate a little bit that we can help provide. And I think this center really provides a great synergy in place for all of that to come together and really maximize those services. And so I know that Pat and probably Mitch and others talked about this at length in November. We're super excited to have the cash in hand to move, hopefully for approval of that design phase process. But this is just really important to us to help support our student athletes, as individuals, as students, as people, and really provide that support in a lot of areas that aren't specific to athletics, but are very important in what they need to do as a student athlete. So I would pause there if there's anything else Brent or anyone wants to add.
Okay, seeing none, were there any questions? Again, this is a information item in November, and it will be an action item for consideration tomorrow. So this would be a good time if you do have any questions to ask them. All right, well then I'm going to assume everybody feels like they are comfortable and they've got all the information they need to make a decision tomorrow. So I'm going to move us on to WSU Spokane Medicine Building Renovation Project Budget Increase. So we have joining Matt and Olivia, Executive Vice President and Spokane Chancellor, Daryl DeWald.
Thank you, Regent Shower and Daryl. Thanks for joining. So this is a change to the budget for the Spokane Medicine Building that was previously approved by the board in September 2021. Two reasons for the increase. We'll be seeking a $1,050,000 increase to the project budget. The first is to catch up with $500,000 in state capital funds that we already had in place back in 2021, but we needed to get those included into the project budget. That corrects an oversight as we got that initial budget approved. And then the other exciting piece of the budget increase is some new funds that have received from donors, $550,000 that can be put to use right away on this remodel. And I'll pause there to let Chancellor DeWald speak to that.
Yeah, I agree with Matt. We're very excited. We have received more commitments for the building. We're very pleased with the partnerships from some organizations and individuals who have seen the value of helping us with this new building. So I'm reminding folks, this is 100,000 square feet plus of space. It was space that was vacated by our partner organization, Eastern Washington University. And rather than moving forward with a new build, we asked the state for $15 million. The space looks fabulous. We plan to open it in July, but we are having named space through donor contributions. So there are additional that maybe in the future I'll be able to reveal. So Matt, back to you.
Great, thanks, Daryl. Olivia, I want to pause if you had anything to add about the project.
No, I think Daryl covered everything that was pertinent. Thank you.
Okay, great,
I would
thank you.
just say on behalf of the Regents, I've had the opportunity to tour the building 3 different times. I've kind of seen it in its phases, and I just a really significant shout out to Olivia and to Eric. I mean, Eric's done a really nice job of finding different ways to cut costs and retool different things, and it's coming together. It'll be a really beautiful building for WSU, but a pretty significant building for the community, for the Spokane community. So just a shout out to the team that's working on this. And Daryl, thank you. You've done a good job ensuring that the private sector knows that there's naming opportunities, as has Kurt.
And with those incredible naming opportunities are opportunities to give more to WSU. And so it's really nice to see when we talk about budget increases, how much we're able to accomplish in that fundraising and philanthropy side. So big congratulations to everyone that's been involved in making this happen. Is there anyone that has any questions? This is an action item that we will be looking for action tomorrow at the board meeting. Okay, well, hearing none, just want to, just really make it clear that these last 2 items will be before the board for consideration at tomorrow's Board of Regents meeting. While we were a little off schedule, according to Dez's master schedule today, we are concluding with a couple minutes before when we anticipated we would be done with this committee meeting. So with that, I turn the meeting back over to you, Chair Dickinson, and the Finance and Administration Committee is completed.
Thank you, Regent Shower. That was outstanding. Great presentations. And just a big shout out to Matt and to Ellen and Meg, and I mean, all of you, and Daryl, Olivia, we appreciate you all being here. And Brent Meyer, welcome to your first Regent meeting, but just so much good work happening from all of you. Thank you very much. It's just your attention and intention around being fiscally responsible is noted. So Regent Shower, good job. Des built you in like a 30-minute window. So it was good. It's really good. Okay, well, a great day. Before we conclude, is there any questions, any further comment from anybody on the call here before we conclude our meeting for the day, and we will be reconvening tomorrow? Anything from our regents? So, okay. Yeah. All right, so at this time, the committee meetings have concluded. I want to adjourn the Regents until tomorrow morning, which would be January 27th, and we will begin promptly at 8 a.m. And we will be convening then again virtually, same format as we are at this time. So everybody have a great evening, and